What is up, guys? This is Simon from Burst Card Gaming, and this is going to be an intro video to the new Xiangjian archetype in Burst of Destiny. Technically, they did debut in Dawn of Majesty. They got one card, but the bulk of their good support is in Burst of Destiny, which is in two main sets from now for the TCG. We should be getting it in mid-October, assuming there's no product delays or anything. And it's a very cool deck. So it's a synchro-based deck that has entirely worm monsters, for the most part, actually, not entirely. And they have kind of a one-card synchro gimmick, in the sense that they summon kind of a monster, and then the monster summons a tuner token, and that gives you more or less a synchro monster off one card. And so these one-card kind of gimmicks have been very popular in the past and have been historically very strong. Think of like Zodiac, for example. So this immediately caught a lot of players' attention. And then it turns out the cards themselves are also very strong, and so this deck has really taken off in the OCG. It's very popular and making waves, even only a week after it's actually released in the OCG, because they've only had Burst of Destiny for a couple days. So it's already kind of winning tournaments and taking names. So I'll show two quick examples of that before actually going to the cards. One is the Road to the King metagame report. This came out like half an hour ago, I think, so I had to re-record this intro to talk about this. So it's already the most rep deck. Burst Destiny is the newest product, so as of this week it was legal, and it's already kind of making waves in the OTG and winning tournaments. So this is one example. I'll go over some deck lists later. And another example is this tweet I wanted to show off. This is from YOCS, which is a card shop in Japan. And they held a 3v3 tournament, which is a very popular format in Japan, and this team showed up. This team is stacked. So on the left is Shinsuke Hayama. He is very famous for having won Worlds back-to-back in 2015 and 2016. In the middle is Sujimura Ryosuke, who won Worlds in 2017 with Dinosaur. And then on the right is Koki Kosaka, who won Worlds with Salamangreat, Great, the most recent World Championship, actually. So this team of 3 Worlds winners decided to enter this OCG tournament, and they got first place. And 2 of them played the Xiangjian deck. So this was from the 23rd, so again, very recent. And 2 of them chose to play Pure Xiang and did very well. And then Koki chose to play Eldritch. So I wanted to share this because it shows that not only is this deck doing immediately well on release, and getting good representation and also good conversion into top cuts, but also that some very strong players have chosen to play this deck, which I think is always a good sign of the competitive viability of the deck, is when good players are looking at these cards and saying, oh, these cards feel good to play with, this deck has potential, and I'm going to try to play it. So I thought that was really cool. I did want to share that. As for the actual contents of this video, I'm going to be going over each of the cards in detail, and kind of breaking them down as an intro to the archetype in case you don't know what they do. So I'm going to be talking about each of them, and then I'll be showcasing kind of a sample deck profile for the pure build, which should be pretty straightforward. And then to make this video series not like insanely long, I'm going to probably only talk about the main deck, and then in future installments I'm going to talk about extra deck, tech choices, and variants. So if you kept an eye out, you would have seen that the Tenyi variant is another one, and so I plan to cover the Tenyi deck list in detail in a later video. And then if people like this video and they enjoy this content, then I'm happy to make more follow-ups. So for like the Infernoble and Drytron videos I did in the past, I did some combo videos. I'm happy to do more of those for this archetype. And I'm even considering doing some commentated replays against other decks, potentially new decks like Flunderies or the Mirror Match. So again, if you are interested in those, please leave a comment and let me know what you want to see. And yeah, I'm happy to do that. But for now, I'm just going to jump into these cards. So a quick disclaimer before we actually begin. The card names in this deck are all kind of temporary. So these are unofficial translations from YG Organization. They did a great job on the translations, but it's very likely that these are going to be changed when we actually get the cards in the TCG. So right now, the unofficial names are very they're very Chinese, because this is it's based in Chinese like swordsmithing. That's kind of the lore behind this, the names of these cards, and they can be hard to pronounce, especially if you're not Chinese. So I will be trying to I'll be saying more or less how you would say these in Chinese, but you don't have to go to that amount of effort. and these are probably going to change when we get them anyway. So don't worry too much about that. I'm going to start with the extra deck, actually, because I think it's important to know the important extra deck cards before we get into the main deck. So the most important card in the deck, arguably, is Xiao, the Xiangjian Grand Swordmaster. So Xiao is a level 8. You need a non-tuner worm, and it adds or banishes any Xiangjian card, it adds or banishes any Xiangjian card from your deck. So immediately this is, this is the way you get advantage, and so you're going to be making this and then searching out one of your good cards. And apart from that, it has a quick effect negation, so it kind of acts like a Hot Red Dragon Arching Abyss in the Dragonlink deck, where you can banish any Xiangjian card or a worm monster from your hand or graveyard, and then you can negate the effect of one other effect monster on the field until the end of the turn. So this is your primary disruption. It's like a pretty modest effect, honestly, but this is, effect negation is so good in the current format against a lot of powerful decks. Like Tri-Brigade, for example, is a deck currently that is kind of bottlenecked by whether you can negate it twice in the same turn, and so Xiao is one of them by himself, and he's just really easy to get out. He adds a free card, and he has a great effect, so there's not really much more you can ask. So all of your combos are going to be aiming to summon Xiao at some point because he's excellent, and the starters are good because of their ability to bring out Xiao. Also noteworthy is that you can only use one of his effects per turn, so you can't use the add and the search in the same turn, and that's going to be relevant if you're going second into a board where you want his negation to break stuff, but you also maybe want to add. You will have to pick and choose in those instances. So that's important to know. So he's a level 8 Xiangjian Synchro. There's only 2. The other one is Chengying, the Xiangjian Grand Duke. This is the level 10 Synchro. So he is totally generic, whereas Xiao requires a worm. So he's totally generic. He has 3k stats, so he's pretty beefy. And then on top of that, he both buffs himself and debuffs your opponent's monsters for every banished card you have. So this is actually deceptively strong. It makes it so that this card is really, really hard to kill by battle. If you've resolved the desires, for example, your opponent needs a 5k monster to beat over him, which is not easy. Yeah. And then he has another effect where he is basically indestructible by card effect, so kind of like Thunder Dragon Titan. If a card effect would destroy Chengying, you can just banish any card from your graveyard instead. And then to cap it all off, if anything is banished during either player's turn, at any point, you can activate this effect, which is like a mini Trishula. So you banish a card from their field and from their graveyard, non-targeting. So immediately there's synergy here because Xiao's effect is a quick effect banish as cost, and then negates something. And then after that, you can trigger Chengying because you banished a card, and Chengying can act as removal. So you remove a card from their field and graveyard. So pretty strong combo, and these two cards are the archetypal synchros we have so far. They're both great. Xiao is definitely better because he is disruption by himself, whereas Chengying by himself is very reactive. So in terms of the level 10 synchro pool, if you have just a Chengying, it's not the greatest, but that's where the last card in this extra comes in. It's a Baroness de Fleur. So this is currently OCG exclusive. We were supposed to get this in Legendary Duelist Synchro Storm, which was supposed to come out in June, but got delayed something like 6 months in the TCG. So we're getting this in late January now instead, which means that there's going to be about a 2-month period where the Xiangjian deck is more or less totally playable in the TCG, but we won't have Baroness. And this card is really important for this deck, insanely important. So it's got 3 great effects. It's totally generic, level 10 synchro. So once per turn, it can destroy something. Very straightforward, very simple. There's kind of no reason for this to have this effect, but it does. So, great effect. Second effect is that once while it's face up on the field, ever, so not once per turn, but just once ever while it's face up on the field, you can basically negate anything and then destroy it. So, this negates Nibiru, which is huge, and then negates, any other hand trap, honestly. And then if they don't hand trap you while Baroness is on the field and they just activate a card, you just get rid of it. So, excellent negation effect. And then the last effect is that during either player's standby phase, you can tag out Baroness back into the extra deck, and it will revive a monster in your graveyard. So, these are just 3 fantastic effects, and most importantly, the negation means that Baroness by itself is annoying for the opponent to play around. And it makes it so that in the OCG, what will happen a lot, if you ever watch like Xiangjian mirrors even, or just this deck in action, is that they'll like start throwing starters at the opponent, and then the starters will get negated, and then they'll be able to stick Baroness on the field, and then Baroness will just win in the game from there. So we don't have that option in the TCG because we're not going to have Baroness for about 2 months. So for the time being, these videos are not going to consider Baroness in mind when we have like, you know, eventually we're going to be in a meta where we do have Baroness and these cards. But the theory that I'm going to talk about for these videos is probably not going to involve Baroness being legal. But it's important to know that Baroness exists in the context of this deck because she's a great part of why the deck is being very successful in the OCG. So that does it for the extra deck monsters. But let's move on to the main deck. So there's going to be 3 important cards here that all have the same gimmick where they special summon a Xiangjian token. And the important thing about the token is that it is a level 4 tuner, which is pretty unique. I'm not sure if we've had tuner tokens in the game before, but this is definitely the first archetype to use them to this extent. So they all summon this tuner token, which is level 4, and then while the token is out, you can't special summon anything that's not a synchro monster. So you can't just like go into Fibrax and do your combos from there. So cool little balancing restriction there, which is very nice because it means the deck really is just very synchro heavy, which is awesome to see. So there are 2 level 4 monsters that do this, and there's 1 level 6. And so those are designed to allow you to access the synchros in this deck, which are primarily 8s and 10s. So we'll start off with the first starter, Moye, the Xiangjian Swordmaster. Moye is a water, so I'll be probably just calling this the water one, so I don't have to like, so you guys don't feel pressure to learn all the Chinese names. But Moye is an excellent starter. Essentially, when she's summoned, you reveal any Xiangjian card, not just monster, you can reveal the spell traps too, or a worm monster, and then you can special summon the token. So you have to have one of those in hand to summon this token. But after that, there's no cost or anything, there's no discards or banishes. And then if you synchro with Moye for anything, you can draw a card. So just a free plus, and it means that, like, for example, if you play Desires in this deck and you resolve your Moye, you've drawn 3 cards and you have, you've dug for more hand traps and generics and whatnot. And kind of your core play in this deck is going Moye, summon a token, synchro for Chixiao, and then you can do Chixiao Chainlink 1 to search, and then Moye Chainlink 2 to draw. So it means that they can't ash your Chixiao search, which is really nice. And then Chixiao will search a card, and Moye will draw a card, and you'll have a 2800 beater with, I think, 6 cards in hand, if I'm doing my math right. So that's like the very basic bread and butter of this deck, and it's just excellent. You get so much advantage off this 1 card, and then the rest is just like hand traps, generics, Call by the Grave, whatnot. So excellent starter, one of the best cards in the deck. The other starter is Taya, the Xiangjian Swordmaster. So this is similar to Moye, but instead of revealing a Xiangjian or a worm, you banish it from your graveyard instead. You summon the same token, same restriction, and then when you synchro with Taya, it's like a Foolish Burial for any Xiangjian card or any worm monster. So on paper, this effect doesn't seem as good as Moye because Moye gives you actual card advantage and Taya doesn't. But there are some really cool things you can do with Taya, and Taya is also really strong later in the game, maybe when your hand is not as large and there's more of a chance of you not having this extra card in your hand for Moye. Taya will basically always be live because you'll always have these worms and Xiangjians in your graveyard as fodder. So these are both excellent cards, and they both get you the Chixiao, which is the important part, and so these are, the starter cards of the deck. The last token summoning card I want to talk about is Longyuan, the Xiangjian Tactician. So this guy's level 6, whereas the Wind and the Water are level 4. So this guy's level 6 fire. He's like Galaxy Soldier, so you discard another Xiangjian card or a worm monster, and then you summon him, and then you summon the token at the same time. So this is not an activated effect on field, this is all from hand, and if it resolves, then you summon him and the token. Technically not at the same time, but whatever. Then the same token restriction, and then finally, if you synchro with him, you do 1200 burn damage. So Longyuan is pretty good. He's really good in the OCG because he makes Baroness. What actually happens a lot of the time is that if you start with Longyuan pitching another card, you immediately threaten Baroness, and then if you can make an early Baroness, it insulates you from all hand traps for that entire turn. Whereas in the TCG, we don't have that option. We have to find other kind of more creative ways to play around cards like Nibiru, which is possible, and I'll go over kind of ways to do that. But this card is really designed to get you access to your level 10 Synchros, and for the time being in the TCG, you have cool options like Xiangjian, and then you have other neat tech options, which I will talk about in the decklist portion of this video. So he's solid. I don't think he's as great in the TCG as he is in the OCG because of the lack of Baroness, like I said, but I think he's still one of the better cards in the deck. And also in this deck, you need Worm names or Xiangjian names because you want your starters to be live as often as possible. And so Longyuan is just one of the better cards in the deck, and so you probably still play him in the TCG, probably at the full 3 copies. The last technical Xiangjian card that was revealed in Burst of Destiny is Chunjun, the Xiangjian Auspicious Beast. He is a level 6 Earth, and his effects are not that great. He doesn't summon a token, which is the biggest thing. So because he doesn't summon this tuner token that the other cards do, he doesn't open up these like quote-unquote one-card synchro options, even though none of these are like truly one card. But you get my point. He doesn't let you synchro by himself. And his first effect is battle related, which is never really a good sign because it typically is like a lackluster effect. And then he also brings himself out by quick effect tributing a card on your field and then summoning yourself from hand. So it's not that great because you're typically having to replace an effect monster to bring out Chunjun because you need to keep your tuner as the token, your token as a tuner for your combos. So it's not really that efficient in terms of your resources. The one thing that this is good for is playing around cards like Effect Failure and Impermanence on your starter. So as an example, if you summon the water and you reveal like Chunjun and they chain Effect Failure, you can chain your Chunjun and tribute the water and it'll resolve with effect. You'll summon the token and then you can go into like a Baroness or something. So that is like an okay use, and his other effect is also good, where if you synchro with him, you can banish a card on the field of the graveyard. And these are good, but I don't think there are good enough reasons to play him in the deck, and most optimized lists are just not playing Chunjun at all, which I expect will be standard in the TCG as well. Next up is Ecclesia, the Virtuous in White. She is a level 4 spellcaster tuner, also in Burst of Destiny. And she has some great effects. So the first effect is like a Pancratops effect. So if your opponent has more monsters than you do, she special summons herself in the hand. This does not activate, so you can't negate this with like an Appaloosa or whatever. And then on the field, she can quick effect tribute herself, kind of like a Lone Fire Blossom, where you can fetch any Xiangjian from your hand or deck. So that's the relevant portion of her effect. And essentially, what it means is that you're always basically tagging out Ecclesia into your water or your wind starters, which in turn is more ways to access your Qixia. So essentially, Ecclesia turns into 3 more copies of your starters, while also being kind of extension going second because he's a free special summon, so kind of an extender. And just more ways to access your engine because Qixia is what it kind of is the core of your entire deck. She has a great effect during the end phase if you can resolve this. So if a fusion monster goes to your graveyard, you can add her back to your hand, which doesn't come up in this deck because this is a synchro deck. But if you play instant fusion, which I will talk about later on, then that's a great way to kind of recur your Ecclesia. So she's great. Personally, I would like her in this deck at 3. I believe the OCG also almost always plays her at 3. There's kind of some debate about whether you play her in like the Tenyi build, for example, because I've heard people say that this card plays worse in the cards like Ash Blossom, and she'd be better off for like playing generics and whatnot. Personally, I think she's excellent in any build, but we'll see, I guess, how standard builds end up being developed and whether they agree. And the last Xiangjian monster, whose text has not been updated in the Dueling Book yet, but this card... Oh, actually it has, in like the last hour of me recording this. So this is Swordmaster of the Illusory Iris, now Xiangjian Swordmaster of the Illusory Iris. So we are getting this card a couple months before every other card, because she is in Dawn of Majesty. whereas the rest of the archetype is in Burst of Destiny. So she is a level 8. She's not a worm, but she is a Xiangjian. And essentially, she is similar to Dogmatica Fleur, where if there is a monster on the field whose effects are negated, she can summon herself from hand as a quick effect. And then she has different effects that activate depending on whether your opponent special summons a monster and where that monster was special summoned from. So if it's from hand, you can bring out a monster from your hand. If it's from deck, you can draw 2 cards. And if it's from extra deck, you can destroy one of those monsters. So these are all great effects. I think most optimized builds, again, are typically tend not to play Iris because you would rather search out other cards in your deck. But if you do play her, she can be good, especially in certain matchups where you can just draw 2 cards repeatedly and you can get a lot of advantage off this one card. And she has natural synergy with Qishao, because what you end up doing is you can go your starter into Qishao. Qishao adds any Xiangjian card, which can be Iris. And then when Qishao negates a monster on your opponent's turn, you can then bring out Iris from your hand. So there's some great synergy there. That's kind of how the card is intended to be played. Again, kind of like the problem that a lot of decks have where you would rather search other cards before Iris a lot of the time, and that's probably why the more competitive builds are cutting her. But she has potential. She's a fun card to play with, and so not like a terrible card by any means. Last up are going to be the spells and traps of the deck. And just an overview first, these all have effects that activate when they get banished by something. So the idea is you're supposed to banish these cards off of cards like Taya and Qishao, because they are all Xiangjian cards, and so you can banish them. And they all have effects. So the spells allow you to modulate the level of a monster you control by 1. So you can increase or decrease the level of a monster on your field by 1 until the end of the turn. So that is a little relevant for some combos. And then the effect of the traps is that when they are banished, you can special summon the same Xiangjian token that all of these cards summon. So it's going to be a level 4 tuner, and it's also going to lock you into Synchros. So they both have relevant effects that come up in certain scenarios. The trap effect is a little better, but the spell effect is a lot more versatile than you think. So let's just jump into the effects. So the first one is the Xiangjian Dragon Sword appears. This is the Rhoda of the deck. That's literally what it is. It just adds any Xiangjian monster from your deck to your hand. Or if you have a Synchro monster, you can add any worm instead. And the worm part is most relevant in the Tenyi build, where sometimes, depending on your hand, if you have a lot of good Xiangjian cards, but you want to access your Tenyi engine, you can add a Tenyi card, and that can come up for follow-up in later turns. And then the spell effect is the level modulation. So this card is excellent. It's the natural 3 of, because this is 3 more copies of your starters. So you'll have the 3 water, the 3 wind. If you play Ecclesia, you have 3 more, and then the Rhoda itself is another 3 starters. And so you have a total of 12 plus starters in the deck, plus consistency cards, and this is just fantastic. So definitely play 3 of this. The other spell is Xiangjian Men, the Grand Spiritual Peak. So this is basically a Monster Reborn for Xiangjians, and if you have a Synchro monster, it's a generic revive for worms. So this card is okay. It's not as good as the Rhoda. I think, like my expectation for this card was it was going to be really solid in this deck, but as I actually played it more, it just wasn't that good. Because this card is, it's not a starter, and so you're kind of relying on this card being live in very specific scenarios, because your Xiangjian cards don't tend to end up in the grave unless you've used them and they got negated somehow. So this card ends up being not that practical of an extender as you would think. And you have to jump through hoops to make this live. You have to revive a guy you would dump with Taya or Foolish Burial or something, and so this card is kind of strange. There's one very interesting use in the OCG where there's a play where you can do kind of a 1-card OTK off the Rhoda that involves the Numeron Dragon package. So this Xyz monster package that summons a Numeron Dragon with 9,000 attack, and you just go for game. And it does involve the revive. I will go into that a little bit more in the deck profile section. But this card, I think apart from that, is a little gimmicky, and I've even seen some lists begin to cut it entirely. So typically I think you see 3 of the Rhoda and 1 of the Reborn for later game scenarios, but I've seen lists begin to cut this, and that may be what ends up being standard as well. Next up is Xiangjian Research. This card is not good, to put it bluntly. It's attack modulation, and it banishes your guys. And then the problem is the only beneficial banish effects you have are the spells and traps, and so you're kind of like not really getting very much out of banishing stuff. And it's just like the attack mod is not worth it in terms of the trap slot. Like if you play a trap, you want it to do so much more than that. So this card is not good. No list should be really playing this unless you like really want to just go wild and play all of the lore cards. In that case, like feel free, play whatever you want. But in optimized builds, you will pretty much never see this card. And then the last card is Xiangjian Sudden Shift. This is one of the best cards in the deck. It is a Icarus attack. So you target your worm and 2 of their cards, any cards, so not just monsters, and then you destroy them all. So great disruption. You can get this off Qishao. And so the bread and butter play I was talking about earlier, where you go Moye into Qishao, or even Taya into Qishao, it gets you Sudden Shift, and then suddenly you have a negation, and then 2 pops on the opponent's turn. So that's very, very good off of very minimal investment. So this card is great. It has synergy as well with level 10 because this can't be destroyed by card effects at all. So what you can do is that if you have this card and Cheng-Ying, you can target the level 10 you control, and then you can protect it with his own effect. So that's also kind of the intended use of this card. Just kind of great. I think most lists are playing 3 of this because he's totally fine to open the trap because you can just search another card off your Qishao. But I've also seen some lists play 2 because he can be bricky. I don't know why I keep saying he when this is a trap card. But yeah, I mean, it can be bricky to open like a trap going first. It doesn't combo as well as your monsters, and so you could conceivably play 2, but I think typically I've seen 3. So with that in mind, we can talk about deck building. And we can actually just build it right here, honestly. I'm going to cut kind of the cards that don't typically see play. And I'm going to add in more cards that, would see play. So, for example, we're going to max out on kind of the good Xiangjians. We're going to max out on the Rhoda. We're going to max out on Sudden Shift. And we're going to play 3 Ecclesia. Not the Dogmatical one. This card does not work in this deck. We want to play the good one. So this is kind of what you'll see in a lot of OCG lists, and then they'll typically play like cards like Pot of Desires, and then you'll see like hand traps, for example. And so pot choice is an interesting discussion in this deck because you can play both Desires, Prosperity, and I've even seen Extravagance in 1 or 2 lists, although I don't think Extravagance is good. But if you see the sheer quantity of 3-ofs, there's not that much that you're scared of losing. And so Desires is kind of very, very free in the deck. It's like there's not much you're scared of losing. It buffs your Cheng-Ying to be enormous. And then the other part of Prosperity is that if you play a card like Prosperity, which stops you from drawing, you lose out on the +1 from Moye, which is, it's minor, but it's definitely, you can feel the impact of losing that plus in certain scenarios. So if you play 1 pot on this deck, I think Desires is the go-to, but I have seen plenty of lists on a total of like 5 pots. The idea being you want to, see 1 pot in your opening hand as much as possible. So it's similar to playing like 5 Desires, but you can't play 5 Desires, so you just play the next best pot. So yeah, let's jump over to an already completed deck that I have sitting over here. You'll notice it looks very similar to what we just had. It's just the same thing, but you play a ton of hand traps to fill in the missing space. And just good generic cards. So these hand traps are totally optional. You can substitute whatever utility you want. If you want to play cards like, Forbidden Droplet or Dark Ruler, Nibiru, Shared Ride, go crazy. Do whatever you want. But this is, I would say, is very similar to what the core of the deck is probably going to look like in the TCG. OCG plays a similar lineup, but they have to deal with Maxi, and so a lot of their cards are dedicated to kind of shutting down Maxi. But yeah, this is, I would say, a fairly generic skeleton for Pure. There's really not much to explain about the Pure list. Like, you saw me throw the deck together just now in like 30 seconds because the choices are very logical. The only like flexes you can make is, you may want to play 0 Spiritual Peak. You may want to play 2 if you really like this card. You may want to play Swordmaster of the Illusory Iris if you're a fan of that card. If you don't like these ratios, you may want to cut down. Even, for example, on Long Yuan, if you're testing without Baroness, then, maybe he's not as good. So you can play around with that, but this is, I would say, a pretty solid skeleton for the deck. I was going to go into the extra deck, but apparently I am something like 30 minutes into this video, and so I'm probably going to cut this one short. In the next one, I'll talk about some extra deck options for both this deck and Pure, or for this deck and the Tenyi version, and then I'll also actually show a deck profile for the Tenyi version. So those are definitely guaranteed, and then depending on like interest and like how many people are actually, want to see how this deck works, I'll follow up with some basic and some advanced combos for both variants of the deck, and then potentially some replays. So let me know if you are interested in the replays especially, and what decks you would like to see in those replays. So maybe like current meta or one of the upcoming decks like Flunderies, for example, the Mirror, etc. So yeah, that'll be it for this one. There's going to be at least one follow-up. Again, I really encourage you guys to be vocal with your suggestions, and I'll try to add them into the video. Leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy this content. I hope you are as interested in this deck as I am, because it is pretty cool, a lot of fun to play, and looks like it's going to be pretty strong. That's going to be it for me for now. Peace.